My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. In Shakespeare's immortal play, Julius Caesar, Cassius tries to convince Brutus that it's in the best interest of the Roman people to stop Caesar from becoming monarch. The famous line reads, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves." Examining the world as it is today, we might pause and ask if the fault actually is in our stars. Joining me this evening to examine this is my dear friend, Master Astrologer Shelley Ackerman. Shelley has written for BeliefNet.com, The New York Post, The New York Daily News, Dell Horoscope, and was immortalized on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Her many radio and TV appearances include Access Hollywood, NBC's Weekend Today Show, Sirius Satellite Radio, The Gayle King Show, The O'Reilly Factor, and ABC's World News Now. She was recently extensively quoted in Liz Smith's column on the eccentric election cycle we are in, and she'll discuss that in detail. She's also playing a major role in ISAR 2016. That's the International Society for Astrological Research Conference coming up this October in Costa Mesa, California. Please join me in welcoming my dear friend, Shelley Ackerman. Good evening, Shelley.
Good evening. That's quite an intro, my goodness.
Well, you deserve all the accolades that I could put together, and there are going to be more to come.
Thank you.
Because you are a very special person. So let's start with a little bit about you for my new listeners. Before becoming an astrologer, you were a professional singer and actress. How did you go from star to the stars?
Well, stars to the stars. First of all, I have to correct you. I don't like to say that I was a singer-actress because I'm still in the acting game, and my intention is to get back on stage. But let's just say I took a little detour, you know?
Absolutely.
So what happened around, let's say 1989, 1990, after singing for nearly 25 years, and I had done the 20th anniversary production of Jacques Brel. I had a really particularly heavy Saturn transit at the time, which can be quite limiting, and there's a lot of gravity with Saturn. Anyway, I was not experiencing the fluidity and the mobility within my performing career, and clearly the universe was trying to get me to do something else. All along, I had this hobby. And I immersed myself because I enjoyed it. I had no intention of it being a vocation or a job for me. I loved studying astrology. I loved observing the similarities with people and how when I would meet someone who looked like someone else, I would find out that they had several planets in common. If not the sun sign, it was the moon sign or the rising sign, so there appeared to be, to me, this undeniable correlation between people and events on Earth and the planets and the movements in the heavens. And this really intrigued me. It just fascinated me. And I studied it because I loved it, for no other reason. And I think that that's probably always the best motivation to do anything. You know, if you love it, you pour yourself into it. So that's kind of what happened. And people would ask me for, to do readings, and I would send them to, established astrologers that I knew who were very good. And some people were quite relentless in saying, no, I want you to do my chart. And it took quite a while for me to have the confidence to take on the responsibility that comes with giving readings. It is a responsibility.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what happened. And, there's this story I tell, and it's a true story, of being on the beach in Montauk, and my hearing, and this was in 1992, when in June, actually late June, just before the July 4th weekend, and I literally heard, it was almost like, in a Greek myth, I literally heard the ocean kind of whisper to me to go to Gurney's, which is a spa out in Montauk, and see if they needed an astrologer. Now, this was ridiculous because I had not done a reading professionally. I it was absurd. And I thought, I don't know. But it was clearly this very strong, undeniable whisper, and I heard it. A little while later, I walked a few blocks into town, and I was in a little boutique looking at the clothing, chatting up the woman who owned it, and I asked her birthday, and I may have said a couple of things about it, and she said, why don't you go to Gurney's and see if they need an astrologer? This is a true story. Now, I knew enough to know that when you're getting it in stereo like that from the universe, you might want to actually, do something about it.
Sure.
So I called Gurney's. I cold called. I'd never, been inside the place. I'd been outside the place. I'd never been inside the place. And they put me in touch with this wonderful woman, God rest her soul, Gisela Waterman, who was like the, lifer coordinator there. And she said, well, we had trouble with the other astrologer we had, but, I'm here every day until 3 o'clock. Why don't you come by? So I walked barefoot on the beach, the equivalent of about 1.5 to 2 miles. I walked there, and it was almost like a spiritual initiation pilgrimage kind of thing.
Yep.
And all I had in my hand, I had not used a computer at that point. I was doing all these things by hand. I had an ephemeris, which is a book of the position of the planets for 100 years, and that's all I had with me. And I met Mrs. Waterman. She said, well, we try it. So that weekend, it was July 4th weekend, there was an eclipse on my midheaven, and I should have known something was up that was going to change my world and move me into a new direction, because eclipses have a way of doing that. And I didn't have a place to stay, and wonderful Mrs. Waterman let me stay in her house. She didn't know me from Adam. And that weekend, I don't know, I did maybe 12, 15 readings. It was a trial by fire. I jumped right in. And within weeks, I did this weekends for a long, long time. Within weeks, the very people who I would have killed myself to audition for, and I'm talking about big recognizable names, both on and off the stage, directors, writers, actors, were lined up at my table for readings. So it was a very humbling initiation, and that's kind of how it happened.
So when the message pushes you there, it's time to follow it.
That's exactly what happened.
I
had no intention, but all of those years of reading and immersing myself in the material were, it was a preparation, but I didn't realize it. And in a way it was good, because had I, done this with, well, I have to study and become an astrologer, blah, blah, I might not have been as good as it. I just did it because I liked it. I just cared. I loved it, actually.
Now you mentioned,
so that's what happened.
Now you mentioned using the ephemeris and doing all of the work by hand and by the other faculties that you employ in that. How did the digital revolution and the entrance of computers...
change it dramatically. I mean, now if somebody gives me their birth information, it takes me all of, a minute to put it into a program and get their chart. This used to happen. This used to take much longer. You would have books of tables. It was a whole, you had to do a whole calculation. You had to be a computer to just get the chart. Then you'd have to worry about interpreting it. But, so it made it a lot quicker to at least get a chart. The downside, of course, with social media and all the accessibility. On the one hand, there's a lot of information online. Some of it is excellent, but a lot of it is gobbledygook.
Yeah.
So it is up to the seeker to be able to discern, and that's not always easy.
So the generalized daily horoscopes that appear in some of the...
That's something else, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your quick comment on those?
Well, you can't divide the entire, 8 billion people in the world now, or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
You can't divide it by 12 and come up with a truth, for each person there. I mean, but the cycle of becoming in nature is 12. And if you think of everything that comes in 12s, whether it's 12 disciples or 12 tribes of Israel or 12 meridians in the body or 12 tasks of Hercules or 12 inches on a ruler, and some say that the tradition of 12 on a jury was arrived at in ancient Greece to represent each sign of the zodiac, because you'd get 12 points of view. So there is something about 12. However, those horoscopes are very general, and at best, and I'm guilty of writing them, at best, it captures the nugget of what is true for that sign. And they're a wonderful introduction. I mean, that's how everybody gets introduced, including me.
Right.
We read our horoscopes, but then you learn that there's so much more to it. And I think the reason that astrology has such a crummy reputation in the world is, people cite these horoscopes and they go, well, I mean, you can't expect that to, be accurate. And then they're right.
Yep.
But it is an introduction, and it's a good introduction.
And my guest is my dear friend, master astrologer, singer, actress extraordinaire, Shelley Ackerman, and we'll be back with Shelley and more about the world of astrology after these messages on Destination Unlimited on the OMTimes Radio Network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Miriam Knight of New Consciousness Review, inviting you to my new show where I interview the rising stars of the conscious awakening. We'll explore the many faces of consciousness and action and intriguing perspectives on life, the universe, and everything in between. Join us each Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on the Rising Stars Show.
In the small town of Elmira, New York, a boy was born into an all-American family. The odds of him achieving his dream in the fashion industry? 1 in 23 million. The odds of having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 68. I am Tommy Hilfiger, and my family is affected by autism. Learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
And we're back with my dear friend, master astrologer Shelley Ackerman. Shelley, we recently experienced, at least I personally experienced, a Lollapalooza Mercury retrograde. And that term and the expression has become part of common parlance when things seem to be fouled up, even when old Merc is direct. Some people just say, oh, it must be Mercury retrograde, whether it is or isn't. Now, for our listeners who aren't familiar with this, what does this term actually mean? And why does it seem like the last couple of these have been so powerful?
Well, okay, so in astrology there's, all these planets, and they're always making aspects to one another, and there are several events going on at any given time. Mercury, the messenger god and the planet of communication, education, transportation, is the go-between between the worlds, and moves very, very quickly. So the key phrase with Mercury retrograde is apparent retrograde motion. 3 times a year, Mercury slows down, appears to be slipping back, going in reverse, and then stations again, and then appears to be moving forward in the zodiac. So those three stations, retrogrades, and forward motion, those events happen 3 times a year. And if the universe or the divine or God or whatever you want to call it did not want us to have a review period 3 times a year, there wouldn't be Mercury retrograde. What seems to make it behave so badly is our very, very Western aggressive approach to life, which is go, 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 profit, 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 full steam ahead. We really don't believe in taking a break or slowing down or reviewing. And so a lot of the mayhem with Mercury retrograde has to do with going against the forces and not taking time to slow down, especially on the days that the planet stations. In other words, there's a kind of standstill. We're supposed to pause. And we don't cooperate. We just don't cooperate with it. And that's when most of the mishaps happen. Mercury is also the trickster. So, yeah, okay, there's a little bit of that going on. Now, to answer your other question about, why the last few have been so rough, there have been other things going on as well. The outer planets, Uranus and Pluto, have been squaring each other for the last several years, and this is, shaking things up. Since April 17th, Mars has been retrograde, which is another factor. Actually, at the end of April through the beginning of May, there were 5 planets retrograde.
Wow.
Now that's that's a lot. So basically, we were being told, hold your horses, slow down. And this notion of moving ahead at all costs, no matter what, is it goes against nature. So I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Absolutely. I can share it with you personally that during that last one, in my daily work with computers and digital technology, right, I had major failures. And I know not only in work related, but personally, our internet service went out 5 times during that period.
Was it in late April?
Yes,
April?
absolutely. Yeah.
So Mars, which also has a lot to do with motion and machinery. So if you put that, it's like a perfect storm, So there were, what was retrograde at that point? Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, and I believe Pluto. I have to double check. But, it's a lot of retrograde. That's a lot.
Absolutely.
So, and these planets have a lot to do with motion, and I've noticed that a lot of the bigger accidents, especially with MTA or the planes that come down or whatever, have to do with these planetary stations, the day that a planet changes directions, when we're absolutely supposed to pause.
In addition to not pausing and not being retrospective and not taking stock of things, do you think there's a connection between people being aware of the retrograde periods and perhaps looking for or even energetically manifesting some of the effects?
Yeah, sure, there could be that. Yeah, look, we look to make things simple and we look to oversimplify, and we like to demonize things,
mm-hmm.
So, of course, people are pinning more than they need to on Mercury retrograde and demonizing it. Look, if you think about the fact that about at least 1/5 of the population, 20%, is born with Mercury retrograde, it puts it in perspective. And if you think about the outer planets, well, Jupiter is retrograde 4 months out of the year. That's 33% of the time. Saturn is retrograde a little more than that, let's say about 38% of the time. And then Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are retrograde maybe 45% of the time. So to make a big stink about, a retrograde planet is kind of silly. You have to take the entire chart into account, and most people don't have the knowledge or the stamina or the interest or the ability or don't care to consider all of that. Actually, the word consider means to get with the stars. A lot of our language that we, just use all the time have an astrological basis. So I don't blame them. Not everybody is called to be a rocket scientist or a surgeon or a scientist or an IT person, and certainly not a lot of people are called to be astrologers and to learn it. But, at one time, astrology was part of a curriculum. Up until the age of reason, astrology and astronomy were one and the same, and then it got separated out. The entire mystical or mythological component got removed from the technological and the math, and that was, I think, unfortunate. I mean, it may have been a necessary part of the evolution of things, but I'd like to see astrology taught. It's a marvelous language.
Now, the focus was on Mercury being retrograde, and you mentioned the other planets. What are some of the effects, for example, of Jupiter being retrograde?
Well, I was born the day Jupiter turned retrograde. Jupiter turned retrograde later the day that I was born. So Jupiter, which is the planet that is opposite of Mercury on the wheel, and if Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo, and Jupiter rules Sagittarius and co-rules Pisces, so they're opposites. And Jupiter rules, where Mercury rules short trips and early education, Jupiter rules long journeys and higher education, the higher mind. So a Jupiter retrograde would be someone who is very focused on internalizing and studying a big philosophical component of life, the big picture, the meaning of it all. It's very deeply committed to, an internal search for truth.
They're philosophers, by Jove.
Yes. Yeah.
And what about Saturn, when Saturn goes retrograde?
Well, again, if you think of a retrograde period as an internalization or a review or something much more personal, you have to look at, not just isolate, okay, this person has Saturn retrograde in Scorpio, but what does Saturn rule in the chart? What aspects does it make to other planets? Who is Saturn in this person's chart? And then it gets interesting. It gets complex. It gets interesting. Astrology is, yes, you have to kind of isolate to know what each planet means and what it means in each sign, but also then you have to put it together in a picture to get the story.
Absolutely. Now, when is the next, you said there are 3 Mercury retrograde periods a year. When's the next one coming up?
The next one will, we're jumping around here, but the next one will be, I believe it goes retrograde August 30th, but the shadow period, in other words, the degrees that it will cover during that retrograde, the shadow period, which is the pre-retrograde, starts roughly 2.5 weeks before that. So if Mercury, goes retrograde at, let's say, 29 degrees of Virgo, and then it's retrograde the beginning of September and goes direct roughly on the 21st or 22nd at 14 degrees and 50 minutes. So it will enter that shadow period on August 17th. It's going to start to slow down, even though it's still direct. Now, you kind of, in a roundabout way, got me into speaking of what I think is going to be a pretty dramatic patch during the late summer. And that is, after Mars, which has been retrograde since around April 15th, goes direct on June 29th, it will slowly creep forward in Scorpio the month of July, return, go forward to, in Sagittarius on August 2nd or 3rd, and then meet up. Mars and Saturn are going to meet up right after a lunar eclipse. There's a lunar eclipse roughly on the 18th of August, and then Mars and Saturn come together on August 24th, a week before the solar eclipse on September 1st. So this period is dicey because Mars and Saturn together, which happens every 2 years, can be problematic. It could be accidents. It could be a dramatic kind of, it can be death, it could be dramatic, it can be accidents. I remember in Scorpio 2 years ago, there was this MTA thing that happened, which was pretty dire. But this one, on August 24th in Sagittarius, concerns me a little bit because it's in between two eclipses, it's just before an election, and it's very close to the USA chart's ascendant. Also, Mars and Saturn and Sag tend to set off events in the Middle East. So I am, a little concerned about the drama at that point, the end of August. Yeah.
My guest is Master Astrologer Shelley Ackerman. Shelley, please tell our listeners how they can find out more about you and all the wonderful work that you do.
Well, you can visit my website, karmicrelief.com. KARMICRELIEF as in Frank.com. You can like my Karmic Relief page on Facebook, and you could friend me on Facebook at Shelley L. Ackerman, SHELLEYLACKERMAN. And, if you wanted a personal reading, you could contact me through the website or call 212-539-3100.
And we'll be back with more of Shelley Ackerman on Destination Unlimited on the OMTimes radio network after these messages.
You're listening to OTR FM, part of the IOM radio network.
Are you in an interfaith relationship and thinking of getting married? For 18 years, Reverend Laurie Sue Brockway has been creating personalized, loving, and romantic ceremonies for couples of all faiths and cultural backgrounds. Reverend Laurie Sue's sensitivity to the needs of interfaith couples is reflected in the compassionate and inclusive way she addresses the concerns of parents and families. Reverend Laurie Sue is also the author of several best-selling books on interfaith weddings and wedding vows. Selected as one of the top interfaith officiants by New York Magazine, Reverend Laurie Sue serves couples in the New York metropolitan area and beyond. Find out more at her website, yourinterfaithwedding.com.
The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
And we're back with my dear friend, Master Astrologer Shelley Ackerman. Shelley, in the beginning of the show, we mentioned your recent appearance in Liz Smith's column. What did you share with Liz?
Well, Liz Smith is amazing. She's, for the audience that I'm sure many of your listeners know her, but for those of you who don't, she's been a society gossip columnist for, 6 decades or more, maybe more. And she's been a good friend to me and a good friend to astrologers. And anyway, so she, her column often covers, current celebrities' goings-on, but also she's very good on history. And I did something, she mentioned, she was doing something about the ongoing fight between Betty Davis and Joan Crawford, and I wrote her something about how the two of them both were Aries with Scorpio rising, and I gave her a whole list about, the Aries people with Scorpio rising and how powerful they are. And then I went into, when I last saw her, I told her about the ISAR conference, International Society of Astrological Research, and we're going to be doing a big symposium in Costa Mesa, California, at the Costa Mesa Hilton, October 13th through 17th. Very excited. There's going to be over 60 astrologers from all over the world.
Wow.
And there's going to be 2 presidential panels. I'm hosting one of them. There's going to be, the first panel is going to be astrologers from around the world, Croatia and England and Turkey, just all over. And then the second panel is going to be just U.S. astrologers to weigh in on the election, which will be 3 weeks after that. Mm-hmm. We have a little problem this year. While Donald Trump has provided his long-form birth certificate because when he badgered President Obama about his not being born in the U.S., we all remember that.
Yes.
He provided his own birth certificate. He won't provide his tax returns, but he provided his birth certificate. As an astrologer, the birth certificate is more important, but we don't have Hillary's birth certificate, and she's hip to how important, how significant that information can be, and she actually gives out different times to different people. No one has seen her birth certificate.
Wow.
So there's only speculation as to the time of her birth, which makes it very difficult for astrologers to do a good job because it's a speculative chart. The same is true for Bernie, who I don't think is out of this race at all. What's been done to him, and it's hard for me to not, be personally involved in this, because I think there's a big component here having to do with the transit of Pluto, the planet of power, death, and rebirth in Capricorn, which will be the case through 2023, 2024. And this is, when Pluto first went into Capricorn, basically at the beginning of President Obama's first term, he inherited this financial mess. And Bernie represents the complete change, which is a few years away. He's just a little early. But as we've seen, there has been a groundswell. This country is I've been saying for years that when Pluto, again, the planet of death, rebirth, power, and transformation, which has a 249-year cycle, returns to where it was when the American Revolution, the first one, took place in 1776. And that's going to be in roughly 2022. We're going to have another revolution. He's about 6 years. Bernie's talking about it. I've been saying it since 2002. He's about 5 or 6 years early.
But he's planting seeds.
Yeah, but it could get, a hell of a lot worse before it gets better. So back to your question, in Liz Smith's column, she graciously just plopped in what I wrote to her, and if with your permission, I can I'll read some of it.
Please, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So what she says is, I don't believe in astrology. She's quoting Noel Coward. The only stars I can blame for my failures are those that walk about the stage, said playwright, composer, all-around genius Noel Coward. I don't know much myself. I don't know how much I believe in astrology, but the often compelling exotic business of the art or science or hobby of studying stars and portents in the sky, celestial objects, and how they affect our earthly fate has always interested and amused me. Sometimes I have felt, after a chart reading, that could be anyone. On other occasions, things were remarkably on the money, or the universe, to be more precisely, lofty. In any case, my good friend Shelley Ackerman, who searches out the meaning of things based on the mysteries of astrology, relayed a few starry facts, among others, Hillary and Bernie and Donald. Believe me, it will be the least stressful read you about these politicians you'll get for the rest of the year. Here's Shelley. So So I said to her, I have relished your recent tales of the so-called tension between Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. Both were born with the potent and combative combination of Sun in Aries and Scorpio rising, an astrological recipe for conquering all in one's wake for men and women alike. An Aries-Scorpio combo is impatient, wired for sound, highly competitive, and in close quarters, fiery and explosive. It's a wonder they didn't kill each other. Whatever happened to Baby Jane was the perfect vehicle to creatively channel the dueling diva warrior energy between them. Gloria Steinem, Diana Ross, Elton John, Charlie Chaplin, Leonard Nimoy, Samuel Beckett, Stephen Sondheim, Aretha Franklin, and Shaka Khan all are Aries with Scorpio rising. Scorpio takes no prisoners, and as the song goes, still water runs deep. The sign of Scorpio is famous for its mystery, depth, secrecy, and hypnotic power, and seems to be a popular sign for investigative journalists and news anchors. The late Morley Safer and Walter Cronkite and the very alive David Muir, Dan Rather, Judy Woodruff, Megyn Kelly, and Andrea Mitchell are all Scorpio. Andrea Mitchell shares her October 26th birthday with Democratic frontrunner Hillary Rodham Clinton. And speaking of the very Marsy Hillary, if elected, Hillary Clinton would join the ranks of John Adams, James K. Polk, James Garfield, Theodore Roosevelt, Warren Harding, to become the sixth Scorpio president of the United States. There's been no shortage of Scorpio first ladies either, including Abigail Adams, Martha Jefferson, Letitia Tyler, Mamie Eisenhower, Hillary Clinton, and Laura Bush. So what do the stars tell us about November 8th, 2016? A bit of Y2K deja vu. Remember when two planets changed signs on Election Day in 2000? Well, we have a similar situation in 2016. So things may begin one way and end up another. Plus, many of the primary wins and delegates accrued in April and May took place with as many as 5 planets retrograde. Heading into June, there may be some reversals. Astrologers from all over the world will gather in Costa Mesa, California for ISAR 2016, a symposium presented by the International Society for Astrological Research, in which over 60 astrologers will present their best forecasting techniques. Anyway, we go on to those, who's going to be there. A lot of New York people, Michael Luton, A.T. Mann, Demetrius Bagley, Robert Corey, Ann Orderly, Gloria Starr, Sam Reynolds, and myself. Other astrologers, Nick Dagan-Best, Chris Brennan, Charlotte Benson, Lynn Bell. I mean, so many of astrology's best around the world. It's going to be really, 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 really exciting. And
important, too. I think it's going to really be important because of the craziness of this year.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's kind of what drew me into it, is really to understand, what traditional, explanations didn't, really cut it, didn't really provide enough. So this wonderful language of astrology gives a kind of reference to understand the machinery of what's taking place on Earth.
Absolutely. We've got about 3 minutes before our next break. I just want to talk about Pluto for a second, because you and I are contemporaries, we're peers, and when we were kids, Pluto was the 9th planet, and then all of a sudden, the astronomers decided to demote Pluto. How did that affect things?
Well, we chuckled, astrologers was like, who are these astronomer fools? If any one of them, including the very wonderful Neil deGrasse Tyson, when you look at his chart and you see when he met Carl Sagan, he was going through a Pluto transit. It changed his life. So anyone who studies Pluto and has seen the correlation between a Pluto transit in their chart and what happens in their life, you don't need, anything more than that. So no one becomes an astrologer simply because they read a horoscope. You get sucked into this, it has to be a calling, but more important, when you study what has gone on, and that there is always a correlation, especially with an outer planet, the planets of change, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. These are the planets of change. And when you have a transit to those outer planets, to a personal planet in your chart, all bets are off. Your life changes. And in every person, anyone who's listening, if we were to look at their charts and look at when Pluto crossed an important point in their chart, in every single person's life, they would tell you, oh my goodness, well, this is when, I got married, this is when I got divorced, this is when, my neighbor's house blew up and we had to move out for 6 months. This is when my mother, had a stroke. This is when, in Neil deGrasse Tyson's case, he was invited to stay at Carl Sagan's house because Carl Sagan didn't want to send him home in the snow or a blizzard or something. I mean, Pluto transits change everything. And that is true for a Saturn planet, a Saturn transit, the planet Uranus, which shakes things up in one's life, and Neptune. When Neptune came to Sarah Palin's midheaven, all of a sudden she was a household name.
And we will hold Pluto near and dear to our hearts, and we're going to talk about more about this wacky year and also the ISAR conference after these messages on Destination Unlimited on the OMTimes Radio Network.
As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Do you want to be a better communicator? Do you want to better connect with the important people in your life? Do you want to enrich your relationships? If so, join me, Matthew Cooper, on the Positive Control System Show every Wednesday evening at 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time on OMTimes Radio. I'll meet you there.
So, I'm a dog, and I'm kind of new to this family, but I've noticed a trend. My humans do this thing where they go around and get all my toys and hide them in this basket. But it's always the same basket, and it's always the same place. And then they act so surprised when I find them. But I'm like, hello? That's where you put it last time. Humans are the worst at hide and go seek.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Host your show on IOM-FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM-FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 235.
Join Elliot Jolish, the business therapist, each Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern for the Elliot Jolish Hour, as he interviews business experts on your behalf. And you're invited to email your business questions to questions@ecjgroup.com for answers, live, on air every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on the Elliot Jolish Hour.
This is Terry Van Horn, and I want to invite you to join me for my weekly radio show, Hailing Light, on OMTimes Radio every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On Hailing Light, we want to bring love, light, and blessings into your world. You can find out more about us at www.healinglightonline.com. Blessings.
And back on Destination Unlimited with my dear friend Shelley Ackerman, Master Astrologer. We're talking about all of the things that are happening this year and that have been developing over the last 12 months. Shelley, why does there seem to be so much anger in the world? The anger that Donald Trump, for example, is feeding off of. And we're not a political show. We really don't talk politics here, but more about human behavior. What's happening in the sky that's manifesting all of this and making him so popular?
Well, I think Deepak Chopra said it best this week where he talked about, Trump basically, grabbing and epitomizing the collective shadow of the unconscious shadow of fear and not wanting to take responsibility for oneself, and he is the embodiment of that collective shadow in the U.S. I think to exacerbate it further, Mars, the planet of aggression and anger and motivation, is retrograde now in Scorpio. So people are pissed at a very, 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 very deep level. They're just pissed.
I've got to share with you that this afternoon I saw there was a couple of cab drivers who were trying to pass each other. They actually stopped their cars in the middle of extreme traffic, got out, and almost came to a fist fight.
God. Well, you bring up another point. I mean, you and I live in New York. This place, which was always crowded, is now, I think there are double. There's not 8 million people here. I think there's 16 million people here. And they keep building and building and building and building. It used to be years ago, Vic, that when you were in a hurry, you got into a cab to save time. Now, you have to take the subway to save time. You can't get into a cab. I think there is something terribly unnatural about the amount of crowding that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
I think there's something terribly unnatural with the amount of the way that greed has taken over, and that it takes 3 times as much effort to be able to take care of yourself half as well as you did, 20 or 30 years ago. And I think all of this has accumulated, and just built into a heap of terror and rage,
And what about this business of us having to advocate for ourselves? Years ago, for example, in the medical profession, if you needed something, the doctors and the medical administrators always were very responsive and took care of things, and they checked your records to make sure they weren't prescribing an incorrect drug. What's going on today that if you're not a personal advocate, if you don't do the research and advocate for yourself, you might as well just dig a hole and jump in?
Yeah. Well, again, I think there's overwhelm. I think the system is overwhelmed. I think that there are just too many people to take care of. I think the pressure to, meet certain quota. I've had to deal with a serious illness in recent years, and one of my doctors says it's so good that you are able to be your own advocate. And I said, I know, it's a shame that I have to be. Because you have to be on top of all of it. And very often, even when you are vocal and, proactive about it, the doctor doesn't want to deal with it. Doesn't want to be responsive, doesn't want to take the time to explain certain things. And, it's very easy to make a wrong decision. I mean, with a lot of the treatment that I've had, it's led to other problems. And they know this, and they pretend that they don't.
Yeah.
They know this. They know that if they do X, then Y happens. And then there's a hole, and then they pretend they play dumb and go, oh, well, what? Like you haven't seen this before? This whole climate of profit over everything else.
And profit. And what are the stars? Where do the stars come in? Where do the planets come in on this?
Well, I mean, if we want to look at it in terms of an evolution or a de-evolution, during the Reagan years, in which Neptune, the planet of dreams and idealism, was in Capricorn, the planet of business, it was the greed is good culture. Warren Gecko was a celebrity, was an icon.
Yeah.
And Reagan basically took us down a path of greed is good. I don't think it was his conscious intention to do that. I don't think he was consciously a bad man, but some of what he did, this trickle-down baloney, it's not true. And I think what happened was this greed, rich getting richer, model took hold, and it just got worse. And I was just reading something Robert Reich said about what Clinton actually did. He allowed himself to be, when he was president, influenced by Dick Morris, and a lot of his policies actually furthered that agenda. Mm-hmm. And now it's become the norm.
Yeah.
And media is used to brainwash, people into voting against their own best interest. Right-wing media, which makes more money than left-wing media, than liberal media. They say, the media has a liberal bias. No, it does not. It does not at all. The media is not at all biased to the left. It's biased to big business and owned by big business. So this is what has happened. Now, Pluto in Capricorn is challenging all of this. And while the banks got a bailout 7 or 8 years ago, Pluto is just at the halfway mark in Capricorn. And it has a few more years before this breaking down of the old structures is complete. So whoever becomes president, on January 20th, has a rough chart there. That inauguration chart is pretty rough. And that's one of the things Raymond Merriman, who is a fabulous, very renowned financial astrologer, and the president of ISAR, the International Society for Astrological Research, he will be presiding over our symposium in Costa Mesa, and I invite everybody to check out the website, isarastrology.org, ISAR astrology.org. We have a YouTube channel with videos from many of the presenters talking about their presentations at this symposium, and the hotel is gorgeous, as is the area, by the way.
Now, this is taking place about, 10 days before the election?
3 weeks.
3 weeks
October
before the
13th
election.
through 17th,
right.
Yeah, in Costa Mesa. And so Raymond Merriman will be out there, and we'll all be out there speaking about this. So to answer your question, there's a Capricorn climax that will happen, a crescendo, in around 2019, 2020, 2021, and it could get pretty dire with financials, collapsing. There could be geocosmic. There could be, many increased earthquake activity. There could be all kinds of things that happen, and we're going to be exploring these late 20-teens into 2020 while we're out there. So there'll be plenty of information shared.
Now, are the international astrologers who are attending the ISAR 2016 conference, will they take part in predicting the U.S. elections?
Yeah, as I said, there's going to be 2 panels. The first panel is the international panel at the opening, and the second panel will be American astrologers at the closing. But you have to remember one thing. Like music, if you put musicians together in an orchestra and you have them from all over the world, and they're reading the same piece of music, they can, it's a universal language. Mm-hmm. Music is a universal language. So is astrology. It's a universal language.
Mm. Now, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No. So, they may not speak English as well as everybody else, but they certainly speak astrology.
There you go.
Good as anybody else,
Absolutely. Have those international signs, then they're universal signs. They apply to everyone.
Right, exactly.
Now, you had mentioned in one of the columns that a candidate's acceptance speech and the chart of that speech is really important. Please explain.
Well, if you think about every moment having its meaning, it's not just a birthday. It could be the moment you start a business, the moment you get married, the moment you start a new job. And so it is true with when a candidate declares himself or herself as being in the race, and when a candidate has officially been nominated and accepts the nomination of his or her party. So astrologers will be looking at that moment. I think the Democratic Convention has a little bit of an edge this year. But then we also have to look at the astrology of Election Day, and I mentioned earlier that 2 planets change signs on November 8th. So you could start out looking one way, end up another. And then we also look at the moment of the swearing in. Now, President Obama had a very rough swearing in. If you'll recall, the judge screwed up and had to do it again the next day. Both charts were pretty awful. And although I think I think Obama did brilliantly. He's the personification of grace under fire, and I'm for the most part, a very big fan. But his entire two terms, have been, all about obstructionism.
Yeah. The Congress not supporting, absolutely.
Terrible, just looking to thwart him at every turn. So the chart for January 20, 2017 ain't too much better.
Yeah, I can imagine. Our guest tonight has been Shelley Ackerman, master astrologer, my dear personal friend. Shelley's taking a major part in the ISAR 2016 conference. Shelley, please share with our listeners one more time about the ISAR conference and about where they can find out more about you and your work.
Well, ISAR 2016, the International Society for Astrological Research, will be meeting with more presentations of more than 60 astrologers, great astrologers from around the world, October 13th through 17th in Costa Mesa, California. You can learn all about it at isarastrology.org. And if you would like to get in touch with me to learn about a personal consultation, you can go to my website, which is karmicrelief.com, KARMICRELIEF as in Frank.com, or call me at 212-539-3100.
Shelley, fascinating and insightful as ever. Thank you so much for joining us this week and bringing your wisdom and your wit to our listeners. And you've been listening to Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Furman. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Good night, everyone.